Tom Pelissero, NFL Network insider, busy man the last few days here. Tom, let me start with the winners and losers. If you were picking out one team where you go, clearly did better than everybody else, and then if I said, give me the loser, who would you pick?
The winners and losers are always tough because a lot of the time, the biggest free agent signings are the guys you see cut 2 years later, and some of those value type signings are the ones that work out the best. Look at the Eagles last year with Zach Bond. Nobody was talking about that. That was as impactful as anything. Vikings had a bunch of under the radar signings. I would say, I think that the teams that were active that certainly at least made an impact on their teams this year. Look at the Patriots defensively, getting Milton Williams. They had to pay a lot to get him, but a game record type. They're playing a new defensive scheme with Mike Vrabel. They also brought in Harold Landry, who got released by the Titans. He's got familiarity with Mike Vrabel. Robert Spillane, the linebacker, Carlton Davis, the corner. I mean, again, you'll see. We'll see because these are all big money types of signings. But in terms of the instantaneous impact, I think that you're going to see it there. I also would say I like at least the philosophy of what Seattle is doing. And they've got some more moves that they're going to need to make. But in essence, they've been going along with Geno Smith. He had wanted a contract redo last year. They don't do that with 2 years left, just organizational philosophy. This year they came to him. They offered him a raise. They offered him a deal. Geno didn't like it, did not respond well to their offer. At some point, they just went, wait a second, we can trade him for a third-round pick and then sign Sam Darnold, who's a decade younger, coming off a Pro Bowl for a little bit less money. We're gonna do that, And then DK Metcalf, you get a second-round pick out of that deal. They're kind of rebooting, year two for Mike Macdonald. What I like about it is they were 10-7 and they didn't go, hey, we're close. We just need a little bit more. It was, you know what? 10-7 is not the goal. Let's try to go win a championship with a coach who's the youngest in the league that we think could be really special here. Again, they still need wide receiver help. We'll see if they get some more here in the coming days as well as through the draft. But I thought that the way that Seattle looked at this, the way they attacked it, I thought really said something about the focus of their front office.
Yeah, Denver stood out to me quietly. Chicago did, Washington did. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, the team that made you go,
Well, once again, I think that just anybody looking at this says the Cowboys are just so generally inactive that it just makes you wonder what's their plan. Obviously they've got a new coaching staff in there. Brian Schottenheimer getting promoted to head coach. Matt Eberflus coming in as the defensive coordinator. We've seen them make some, relatively smaller moves. They traded yesterday for a couple of former high draft picks, Kenneth Murray and Kyer Elam. But, Murray had been a fine player, but that was a salary dump for Tennessee. And Kyer Elam had started like 12 games over 3 years. That's kind of like the Jonathan Mingo trade they made last year from Carolina, where they gave up a fourth for a guy that they thought was a really top wide receiver in the draft, but he hadn't had any, he hadn't had a lot of productivity. And so, their biggest free agent signings at this point, I might be forgetting somebody off the top of my head, but, Javonte Williams, a running back who I was at the game in Dallas a couple of years ago when he had the best game of his career, but he had an injury. He's not quite had the same level of productivity. You had to be sitting there and going, when Washington's making all these moves, right? They did it at the deadline last year with the Marshawn Lattimore trade. They did it with the Deebo Samuel trade this year, a Laramie Tunsil trade. They're going all in, saying, hey, we got to catch up to the Eagles. We're going to cash in right now on a rookie quarterback contract. For the Cowboys, they're locked in with Dak. They're locked in with CD. They got to figure out the Micah thing, and they're operating like a team, whether it's right or wrong, that doesn't have a whole lot of flexibility. And you just wonder, I'm not saying what they're doing is wrong, but you do wonder, okay, what's their plan for catching up in a really, really competitive division?
And I don't know if this is true, though, Tom, but it feels like Jerry Jones wants to prove how smart he is in the draft. Free agency, okay, I sign checks, but they don't go after free agents. And they have done well in the draft, but I don't know why it's like a college coach who doesn't believe in the transfer portal. You got Dabo Swinney at Clemson. He doesn't believe in the trend. And you're like, you better get up to speed. But Jerry they've never spent money. Who is it? Greg Hardy is their big free agent signing a decade ago?
That was a wild one. I saw that stat that's the last one they signed to a contract above like $8 million per year in free agency. That feels like a lifetime ago, and there's a whole Greg Hardy side story we don't need to get into there. But yeah, they've not been super active. They've been, in most cases, slower to get their long-term contracts done. And the problem with that, we see it over and over, is when you wait on these deals, all that does is give more leverage to the player, whether it's because of Dak playing out a franchise tag. It's like, why does Dak make $60 million? I see people say it all the time. How does Dak make 60? Josh Allen signed for 55. It's about leverage.
Yeah.
Dak played out a franchise tag. They were at risk of having to tag him a second time, which they did until the paperwork went through. And then he played toward the end of that deal, and he had all the leverage in this case. The same thing with CD last year, where Justin Jefferson resets the market. Now you're seeing it with Micah Parsons. If the Cowboys jumped out, whether it was, forget about last year, you jump out in March and just say, you know what, we're going to get this deal done with Micah. You're probably talking about, hey, we get it done about what the Max Crosby number was, right? Which is like $35.5 million a year. Now Myles Garrett gets 40. Micah Parsons' agents are sitting there going, great. We'll sit back and wait and see if we get 41. And now you potentially have another offseason where it's dominated by what's going to happen with Micah. It would give me the indication that they're at least open to exploring whether or not they would trade him. I know they've had internal discussions about, okay, what's the right thing to do when, if you sign him for 40 million plus, that's going to give you a super top heavy type of a roster here. It's just, that's kind of the Cowboys' way of doing business. And I definitely understand the frustration of fans who are just going, what's the plan to get better? Again, when you're chasing literally the Super Bowl champs who arguably have the best roster in football.
Tom Pelissero, NFL Network insider. The Aaron Rodgers situation, I'm curious about this from the Minnesota standpoint. Why don't they just come out and say, we're not interested in Aaron Rodgers? Like, you've already said to J.J. McCarthy, we're moving on from Sam Darnold. We believe in you. If you truly believe in J.J. McCarthy, unless they do, they're curious about Aaron Rodgers.
Listen, if the Vikings called Aaron Rodgers today and said, hey, what do you think about coming and playing in Minnesota? Aaron Rodgers would be off that beach with the shawl around his shoulders and be on a plane to Minnesota instantly. I mean, that's the truth. Kevin O'Connell and Aaron Rodgers have a relationship. They're about the same age, believe it or not. They are both California guys. They've known each other for years. They talk, they text. But you drafted J.J. McCarthy last year, 10th overall, with the philosophy of exactly what, like I was talking about with Washington, where you got a young guy on a cost-controlled rookie contract. You can spend all this money elsewhere. You can use draft picks. You can go, we're going to try to win right now by taking advantage of the fact that we've got the quarterback on the cheap. Aaron Rodgers, I believe, would come and play for, not very much money at all in Minnesota, but you're still changing the path for J.J. McCarthy at that point. It would be different if Sam Darnold were coming back off the year he had. They made him an offer. Seattle offered him way more money. He's gone. Daniel Jones, they tried to bring back to give themselves an option here, just because J.J. McCarthy is in a very rare position where not only did he not play as a rookie, he didn't take a rep the whole season, and there's no precedent for that. But once those two options went away, my understanding has been the most likely scenario, highly likely, is that J.J. McCarthy is going to be the starting quarterback, and they'll pursue a backup option. Why have they not ruled it out publicly? I would say the Vikings philosophically just don't rule anything out publicly. Is there some scenario here where, think about this, Dan. J.J. McCarthy has a setback in rehab. I'm not saying he has. I'm saying if that were to happen, right, in May, or he tweaks something in OTAs, and Aaron's sitting out there still wandering in the sand, maybe you go, hey, this is exactly the type of opportunity here. And I think that, from Aaron's perspective, and listen, there's only one person inside his head, and Aaron's deep inside there. He's got to make up his decision about what he wants to do. Does he really want to play? And at some point, some of the options that he's got right now potentially are going to go away. Because right now, Russell Wilson's in Cleveland today. If all of a sudden the Browns, and I don't know that this is going to happen, but let's say the Browns decide, we'd like to make you an offer. We'd like to bring you in. And now all of a sudden the Steelers are in a situation of, all right, we can either keep waiting for Aaron, who learned a lot from Brett Favre. And when Brett Favre went from the Jets to the Vikings, he signed on August 18th in 2009. We can't sit here and just wait. We don't want to lose. Russell Wilson would be plan C because Justin Fields was plan A. We don't want to go from A to B to C to whatever is D. We need to do something right now. That's where the teams at some point might need to move forward. It hasn't happened yet, but that time is coming here. And as much as Aaron might feel like he needs to meditate on this and really get in touch with all the different factors in his life, at some point you got to make a decision, and time will tell how much leash the teams are willing to give him to do that.
I don't let Russell Wilson out of the building if I'm Cleveland. I just say, hey, Russ, let's make this work. You can show Pittsburgh. We'll come back and haunt Pittsburgh here and, whatever, your reclamation tour. And I wonder if the Steelers could be kind of, let's say Aaron Rodgers says, hey, you know what? I'm going to play for the Giants. Like, Pittsburgh could be Duck Devlin or whoever. Like, I don't know what plant Gardner Minshew or Drew Lock. Like, they could be down to plan D here.
I love a good Devlin Duck Hodges reference in the morning, Dan. Yeah, I mean, listen, there's are some other things out there, but yeah, let's game this out. Let's game out the situation that you just did, which I talked through with some people this morning. Let's say, and I don't know what's going to happen. Let's say the Browns sign Russell Wilson today. Now the Giants and the Steelers are waiting on one guy who may or may not even decide that he ultimately wants to play football in 2025. Your other options beyond that are you try to get Kirk Cousins out of Atlanta, where that's still an evolving situation there. He's due 27.5 fully guaranteed, another 10 million for 2026 vests if he's on the roster come Sunday. The Falcons don't seem concerned about that at all because they figure, hey, another 10 million vests 2 years from now, he'll probably make that and it'll be offset anyway, so not a big deal. They're going to wait, but Kirk also has a no trade clause. He might not want to go to certain teams that might have an interest in him. So that's one option. Then after that, you're into, is Joe Flacco a starter in the NFL somewhere this season? Jameis Winston, Drew Lock is still out there. You try to make something out of Trey Lance. I mean, your list of options are getting shorter here. I don't know, frankly, if any of these options, Dan, they're big names. I don't know if any of these options are stuff that fans are going to, blow up the phone lines or get online and buy tickets to go see 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers, 36-year-old Russell Wilson, 41-year-old Joe Flacco. I don't know that any of these are, the options that are going to spur you, not the way it did when the Jets traded for Rodgers a couple of years ago, but they are competent quarterbacks. And in a quarterback draft where there's very little certainty beyond Cam Ward probably being the first quarterback and quite possibly the number one overall pick, at least locking in somebody who can go out and function in offense and get the ball to your playmakers, it gives you a little bit more optionality.
But can they afford
these next 6 weeks?
Can they afford another 9-8 season? Can Mike Tomlin afford another 9-8? Maybe you make the playoffs and you bow out again in the first round.
I think Mike Tomlin has a very unique situation in Pittsburgh, and I've talked with Art Rooney for it before. Art Rooney's belief, and he got this from his father and his grandfather, was as long as the coach's voice is still resonating in the locker room, you feel like people believe in him, they're not going to move. But I would say the Steelers are not standing pat. They just traded a second-round pick to go get DK Metcalf and gave him the biggest contract for a non-quarterback in franchise history. So the Steelers are being proactive here. If I'm George Pickens and I'm DK Metcalf right now, I definitely want to know who's throwing me the football. Russell Wilson, listen, he's 36. He doesn't move as well. He doesn't throw the ball as well in the middle of the field as he used to. He doesn't have the same escapability. If there's one thing he does, it's throw the ball to the perimeter, 50-50 balls, let your big receivers go and get it. Well, the Steelers have the biggest outside receivers in the game right now with Pickens and Metcalf here. I know that people are going to look at that and say it's not a really alluring option, but for the Steelers, if that's where this ends up, it does make some sense to give it one more shot, hope Russ is healthy and can find, 17 games like he found about those first 4 or 5 that he played last year.
Any chance? Well, I guess the Niners are going to sign Brock Purdy, right? That's not in doubt. They're
negotiating. Okay. They have had negotiations, exchanged bargaining proposals. I would anticipate that they are going to get Brock Purdy signed. As for Mac Jones, because I know that's where you're going, there was a lot of discussion about them taking him in the draft in 2021. They ultimately opted for Trey Lance. They actually tried to trade for Mac Jones last year when he got traded to Jacksonville, but they offered a really low pick. The Patriots decided to send him to the Jaguars instead. So this is like the third swing that Kyle Shanahan and company have made at bringing in Mac Jones. And listen, if something were to happen to Brock Purdy, if he were to get banged up, I think they'd feel good about Mac Jones going in. But this does not bear, from my understanding, on the Brock Purdy negotiations. They still want to get him locked up for the long haul. If you look at the numbers, even in a quote-unquote down year for him last year, he's still one of the most efficient quarterbacks in football. The key is going to be what's that number at a time that, think about this, Dan, the highest paid quarterback 2 years ago in the NFL for a brief moment was Jalen Hurts at $51 million a year. He is now the 10th highest paid quarterback. You wonder, where's all those cap dollars go? The cap's exploded by 25%. Most of that's gone to the quarterbacks.
Thanks for spending time. And I know you're busy. Thank you again, Tom.